Hello and welcome to this video. In this video tutorial we're going to be talking about morph targets in Unreal 4 and how we get blend shapes out of Maya 2015 and export them and bring them into Unreal. We're going to bring them into Unreal and we're going to create a blueprint which handles allowing it to be played on the timeline within Matinee. So basically having a cinematic system controller blend shapes in real time. So this is something that is actually being done for what we call static meshes. So static meshes have no bone system, no real animation besides rigid body animation. And the way this is being accomplished right now is by using world-space translations, or vertex shaders, essentially. And I'm a material guy, and vertex shaders are a little bit beyond my knowledge right now. It's a lot to understand, and if you're interested in learning more, there is this Twitch broadcast by Unreal Engine. The team at Epic do a little bit of an instructional on how to use this system, and the stuff that they're able to create with it is pretty amazing. And of course it is, because these guys are, they're the ones that are making the system in the first place. So the one that he's using here not only uses morph targets on static meshes, but they're also incorporated into the particle system. So when these particles hit the ground, they spawn a static mesh, which has blend shapes and animation data. So similar techniques are being used for cloth simulation, and basically anything you want to animate that's wavy. We got trees and grass and all sorts of stuff like that. And it's very, very complex to get into. And they've set up a system with the Max, 3D Max workflow. There's a plugin that you download, and it'll convert your static mesh with its blend shapes into something that Unreal can read. And then Unreal has its own new node in the material editor, which basically, I think that was it right there. So that would be this one right here. It's a little hard to read because it's not, but it's a blend through camera something or other. So without this custom shape, it would be impossible to have blend shapes on static meshes. So because this system is so complex and it requires you to use 3D Max at the moment, I'm sure someone will eventually come up with a ML script from Maya if it's not already out there. But if you're interested in learning more about this, please watch this video. It's very informative. All of these Twitch broadcast videos are, and I would recommend watching this if you're even just slightly interested in this stuff, because if you were to put, a summer's worth of work into understanding this kind of stuff, you would probably be one of the most talented people using the system in an indie space. Obviously, there's guys getting paid to do this every day at big studios, but there's not too many individuals that know how to use this system yet. So I would recommend definitely checking it out. So with all that being said, what are we going to do? Because we're not going to use this approach. Well, we're actually going to use blend shapes with skeletal meshes. So the idea with using blend shapes on a skeletal mesh, typically in Unreal, is to add definition to our animations. So when your expression is far beyond the normal stretching of a bone system, you can use blend shape and use this blend shape to literally blend in between one expression and the other. And an animator can use these blend shapes in Maya and animate vocals and any other expressions on the face. And not only do we use it for expressions, but we use it to help with bones, or not bones, but like an elbow squishing and armpit stretching and all sorts of weird anomalies that happen when we have a rigged system. So anyways, the new system set up for the static mesh can only support 3 individual morph targets, and that's because it's using a vector node to control those. So vector is 3 numbers, 3 floats, and those 3 floats are limited to 3 different shapes. So The nice thing about using blend shapes on an animated and a rigged mesh is that there really is no limit as far as I know. I'm sure there must be some sort of technical limit, but beyond what you would reasonably use, there's no limit. All right, so let's go ahead and just jump right in. So the example I'm going to be using is just a really simple, very not pretty ice cream cone. So I'm just going to create a cone. I'm going to delete this top face so I don't have to worry about any n-gons. And I'm going to actually scale this up so it's going to be visible because I am working in the centimeters scale rather. And I'm just going to create a little sphere. Just going to act as my ice cream. This actually looks more like a snow cone. I have a funny story about a snow cone. If you ever meet me in person and want to hear that, I will tell you. It's a sad story. You're probably all interested now. I'm not going to tell you. All right. So I've got my really simple ice cream cone. And I'm going to go ahead and combine my mesh. I'm going to go mesh and combine. So now it's all one mesh, and I would recommend using one mesh when using skeletal systems. It just keeps things a little bit easier for us. All right, so the next thing I want to do is take this and duplicate it. So now I've got a copy. I can move it pretty much wherever I want. The really nice thing about blend shapes in Maya is that it doesn't really care about world space. It's only caring about object space. So what I can do is grab the faces of my ice cream and shape it to some really crappy melted phase. And, heck, let's even grab one of these and like pretend it's a drip. Oh, it's not good. I would hope that anybody's work would be nicer than this. This is going to be a little funny. All right, so the idea is that we have two shapes that have the same vertex count, same number of faces. We didn't change anything about the geometry except where the placement of the vertices are. And because all these vertices are still the same ones, if I select one and I was to go into my component editor to check this out, I can see that I have vertex 164. And if I grab the corresponding one, I'm not sure which one it is over here, it would still be 164. So the blend shape is looking for individual verts. And so long as you have the same mesh without changing any of the geometry besides the actual vertex placement, you'll be fine. All right, so if you haven't already done this before, this is just creating a really easy blend shape by selecting our first we select our blend shapes, and then the final selection will be our master shape, the shape that we want our object to inherit most of the time. And then we can go up into animation, and then we want to go under blend shapes. So now when I click on this object, yes, autosave, thank you very much. We can see that we have P cone 3, and it's going to be important to remember P cone 3 later on. But I can just click on this and already start to see what this is looking like. So if you were very careful with the way you set these up, you could do multiple layers or multiple blend shapes on top of each other. Obviously, that would take a lot of extra work, but it could really pay off. All right, so this is just a really, really simple blend shape at the moment. So if you had a whole sequence, what you'd want to do next is delete everything that's not your main mesh. This still has the blend shape data. You can see right here. And just as a test, let me see if we can delete all by type. And I think non-deformer history is what we want to go with so we can keep our blend shapes. All right, and the next thing we want to do is create a skeletal system. And because an ice cream cone would normally be considered a skeletal mesh, we don't really need, normally a static mesh rather, we don't really need a complex bone system for this. So I'm just going to go into my front view, and I'm going to create a root bone and then just one more bone and hit enter. And we can see that, yes, there really is a bone system on an ice cream cone. And so the next thing we do is skin this up. Just select our bone system and then our skin, smooth bind. So now these vertices are bound to to our bones. Obviously, this isn't skin weighted correctly, so these bones would have no other function other than, you know, acting as a dummy, essentially. Because all I'm going to be using in this example is blend shapes. Of course, if you wanted to, you could add these bone systems to individual objects on your ice cream mesh. So if you had your cherry on top and you wanted that to, as the ice cream was melting, roll off, you would attach a bone to it. So you'd have a root bone, and then you'd have another bone which is in the center of it, so the rotation would be correct. And then you could animate that and then play the animation on top of the blend shapes. And that would be really cool, but a little bit more advanced. So we'll stick with the easy thing for now and just having basically dummy bones. Let's take a look at our blend shapes, make sure those still work before we go on. Yep, they're still functioning properly. So I'm going to delete my non-deformer history one last time. And I'm going to open up my outliner and look at how perfect it is. We have our mesh and our two bones. That's all I want. So I'm going to go into File and Export Selection. As you can see, I've already tried this before. This was actually my first time using blend shapes in UE4, and I gotta say, I'm really impressed with them so far. I think it could really be a powerful way of animating facial expressions. Very cool stuff. Let's take a look here at our settings. It's going to be very similar to what we were using before. So geometry, smoothing groups on, tangents and binormals on, preferred asset content, referenced asset content rather. Still not sure what that is. Anyways, animation checked on, and this is where the only changes might be happening in your setup. Deformed models, skins, and blend shapes. I'm not sure if they all have to be checked on, but we're going to include them all. And like before, turn off cameras, lights, embedded media, input connections, set your scale factor to centimeters, because that's what Unreal looks for, and set the up axis to Z, and that's all we need. So I'm going to export selection. And I didn't get any errors. That's really good. I was running into some a little earlier today. And I've just got my scene right here. This is testing I've been using over the semester for this class. And basically I've been practicing importing cameras out of Maya into Unreal 4, which is not recommended. But it is still possible. Alright, so I'm going to go into my meshes. I'm just going to delete everything from the past. Well, you know what? Actually, I'll leave those in, just so I can reference my earlier blueprints, just in case I forget something. And then I'm going to grab my ice cream cone 4, which is my latest one, drag and drop it into my content browser. And then I'm going to grab the content browser window, or the import window rather. I just definitely want to import mesh. This is going to be a skeletal mesh. I don't have a skeleton imported already, but if I did, I could just find something else, but there's no animation data here anyways, besides the blend shape, so I'm not worried. One more selection that might not be on by default for you. Import Morph Targets. Make sure that that's clicked on. Import animations, exported time. I might not even need to leave this checked on. We'll try this turned off actually for a moment. Normally, obviously, you don't want to import your animations, but we might be able to keep just the Morph Target info without this. So import materials off and textures off. Let's go ahead and get it a shot. All right. Ice cream cone 4 imported nicely. We have our blend weight. Oh, and look, it works straight out of the box. Perfect. All right. So now the tricky part. So I'm going to go ahead and close out of this real quick. And the next thing I want to do is just drag and drop a copy of my ice cream cone into my scene. It's not a very pretty ice cream cone. You probably wouldn't want to eat it. It's probably made of the slush on the side of the road after a snowstorm. So I dropped a copy of this into my scene. This is my skeletal mesh. I didn't drop in, well, I don't have one, but sometimes when you import your animations, you will have a animation sequence included. Do not use that one in this case. We want to use the skeletal mesh. So drag and drop a copy of that in, and the next thing we want to do is build a level blueprint to handle, well, you know what? Actually, we'll set up our matinee first. So I already have a matinee created, so I can just go under matinee and open up my matinee actor. And if we see this, I already imported my camera, and it's just based on a Maya camera, which is bound to a curve which wraps around. So you can see I got a couple things going on in the scene. It's not really pretty, but it's focused right on the middle, which is where our ice cream is. So we can take a look at that. And the next thing I want to do is delete this because we're going to make a new one. So in your tracks, under matinee, what you want to do is create a brand new group. So after you set up your camera animations and you have your object in your scene right where you want it, and you're ready to set up your blend shapes, or your morph targets rather, what you do is you add an empty group, and I'm going to call this events. I'm going to right click on this, and I'm going to create a new event track. So an event track is pretty much exactly what it sounds like. When I create a new key, and I'm going to create one in about 5 seconds, and I'm going to call this melt or malt. I'm going to call it malt. This is now an event in Unreal 4, which can be referenced in our animations and in our blueprints. And it really allows us to get exactly what we want out of an animated sequence here. So we have our malt keyframe, and the next thing I want to do is create a blueprint which, when this matinee plays, sees that this malt has been activated and then plays something for us. And we want to play our morph target. So the way we do that is, well, actually first I'm going to close out of matinee just so it doesn't get in the way, because it can be a little tricky if it's still open and you're working on other stuff. So I'm going to go into my blueprints, and I'm going to open the level blueprint. And this is what we're going to be making right here. So the way we do this is, first we need to select our object which we want to affect with the level blueprints. And essentially, I didn't really go over this, but what a level blueprint is the basic coding that's going to be inherited through the entire level. So blueprints can be made instanceable. So you have a blueprint down here, and you can drag and drop it multiple times in the scene. This one is a little bit different because it's basically handling large things in the scene, relationships to other objects, and so forth. We could create a blueprint down here which handles the same thing, but this is a little easier. All right, with that out of the way, what we need to do is make sure our object is selected first, and then I'm going to right click down in here, and this is where we create our new nodes, which are C++ based, which will be added into our visual scripting system. So create a reference to ice cream cone 4. So this is now a reference to this particular object in the scene. So it's looking at this object in the scene, and it's looking for information from it. So the next thing we want to do is create our morph target node. So I'm going to drag this over to the right, and I did that real simply. I just clicked on this little blue node and dragged off to the right, and I'm going to look up morph target. The search system in here is really, really nice, and we see we get a couple options here. Under skeletal mesh, we have clear morph targets, get morph target, and set morph targets. So for our instance, this is going to be what we're looking for right here, set morph target. So I can click on that. And what this is going to do is, when something happens, it's going to play set our morph target to a certain value. Well, what we really want to do is animate our morph target. So we want to be able to say, start our morphing now, continue on, continue on, continue on, stop. So that's what we're going to do. And the way we do that is by creating a timeline. So if I right click on the empty space and scroll all the way down, there is add timeline. And timeline is a really useful feature for animating animating all sorts of stuff. So let's take a look at this. First thing we want to do is to plug in our what are these called? These are basically event graphs. So it's like when this is done, this will begin. There's a specific name for it. I always forget. Shoot, I'll think of it later. So update is what I want. Yes, I do want update. And you'll see, first we have to click on this timeline to get the data. So let me show you what I'm trying to do. So direction is what we want, but direction is not really a single value. Direction is like a vector, I believe. So if you were to drag this and try and drop it into value, it's going to say, hey, these don't groove together. So we need to change this to a float. So I'm going to double click on this, and this is now my timeline. So basically I'm inside, this is the old one. I am inside this node when I'm on this tab right here. And what we want to do is create a new track, which we can edit, and we want to make it a float, which is just a single number. So I did that, and this should be instantly recognizable to an animator. It's just an animation graph, very, very simple. You can set the overall time right here, so I'll make this, I don't know, like 10 seconds. And we can see that doubled the length right here. To move around, all you do is right click and drag around. Very simple. And we want to add a couple keys, so I'm going to right click on the line and I'm going to add a key. I'm going to set the time at 0 and make its value 0. And I'm going to add a key, and I'm going to drag this off to the end. My length is 10, so I'll make this 10, and I'll make the value 1. I don't want to make it higher than 1, because when you increase morph targets above 1, they start doing crazy things. All right, so what this is saying, when the morph target starts, it's set at 0, and the further it goes along, it reaches 1, which is all the way morphed to the other target. So I can go back into the event graph, and the next thing I want to do is set my morph target name. You can actually, I believe it's possible to create a system which would handle multiple morph targets, but in this case we want to use just one. Excuse me again. So remember when we named this, and I said it was going to be important what we named it. So pcone 3 is exactly what we're going to be looking for. So I can come over here and type pcone 3. And this has to be absolutely exact, or otherwise it's just not going to work. All right, so now we have our new track 1. I could go ahead and rename that to something something melt. Oh no, that's not right. Malt sequence. All right, so we have our malt sequence, and I'm going to plug that into value. So now what this is saying is, as this plays, this starts, this plugs into this, so it's going to say when this starts, oops, this is going to start this working. Oh man, what is the name of that? That's going to kill me. Anyways, this is going to start this going, and what this is looking for is the value from this sequence. All right, so the next thing we can do is get this timeline to play. As you can see, there are input arrows on this side, which are looking for certain things. You can set play, you can say play from start, stop, reverse, reverse from end. You can do all sorts of really cool stuff with your morph target, or your timeline in this case. If you were to double click on this, you can actually use autoplay and loop if you wanted it to start exactly when you start the level and have it just repeat over and over and over again, in which case you'd probably want this to have more of a arcing timeline. Anyways, we're not going to do that. We're actually going to use our event inside of our matinee. And this is going to be a much more elegant solution. Because you could set up timers and do it that way, but man, that would be a headache. All right. So remember when we grabbed our ice cream cone to create a reference? We got to do the same thing again. But this time, what we're actually looking for is reference material, which is coming from the matinee, our events. So I'll look around here for my matinee. Oh, there it is. And I can right click over here again. And then I can create a matinee controller for matinee actor 0. So it's not actually a reference. You could create a reference and then create a controller from that, but we're just going to create a controller straight up. And because I'd already created one, it's just going to pop up here. So I'm going to go ahead and delete all this stuff because it's no longer necessary. And we can see it's got a couple things on here. Malt. It's there. So, and this will also play when finished. Finished is up there by default. So if you wanted to have something in your level start right after your cinematic sequence is completed, that's what you'd use. But in this case, we want to use our event. If you're not seeing the event keys, which you placed up here, if this isn't showing up, so let me create a new one. I'll create a new one here called, select the actual track first, create a new key and do test. I can't type. Test. All right. And then we look over here. It happened to update. Sometimes it'll update in real time. If it's not, all you have to do is hit refresh nodes for it to show up. So I'm going to go ahead and delete that because we don't need a second one. It seems to be working nicely. So now what this is saying is when malt happens inside of the matinee, this timeline plays, which is telling our morph target to start and for it to look for the sequence in this timeline. So the values that we've set right here. So we're pretty much done. Let's go ahead and give this a shot. So I'll go ahead and show you the problem. So I'm looking through my director group, which has my camera. I'm going to hit play real quick. And we'll see that malt is right here. And nothing happened. And the reason that is because when we're playing through the matinee, events aren't actually triggering the level blueprints. And I'm not sure why that necessarily is. I think that's a crappy way to go about it, but it doesn't seem to run unless we actually play our level, which is a little crappy because you actually have to play your level to view your event. And there's probably a way around this, but I haven't figured it out yet. So obviously, with any sort of system, there's limitations at first, and try to trick your way into finding a way around them. But for now, we're just going to go with what we know. So I can just, first I want to make sure that my matinee plays by default. So if I select my matinee actor right here, I want to make sure that play on level load is selected on, so that when I play my level, this sequence starts right away. So play through selected viewport, hit play. And we can see that it's slowly melting. Very cool. And when it's finished, when the timeline has finished, it will maintain the last morph target that it was looking at. So that's about it. What we did was we created a really simple ice cream mesh in Maya. We exported it. We brought it into Unreal 4. Then we set up a system in Matinee that could help trigger an event, which would actually create our melting point for us. And then we built a blueprint, which actually handles the morph targets. So I know it's a little bit of a complex way to do it, but video games, I guess, are always going to be complex. And one day it'll be really, really easy. But right now we have to do it the whole tricky way, and trust me, it's a lot easier than it used to be. It's actually possible in the first place, which is cool. All right, so I think that's going to be it. Thanks for watching. Send me an email if you have any problems, and good luck with your project.